All right, so I believe I was just talking to myself because streaming hadn't started yet. That's okay. Now I can explain all of this to you a little bit more concisely. So if we jump over to the table section, I'm just going to delete some of the stuff that I did before. Or better still, I'll probably just quickly tell you what I did. So on the notes table, if you click on edit table here, then you can add in user ID. And if you click on this button here, it allows you to basically set a relationship. So the user's ID is linked to the user ID column on this table. All right, so that's what that's all about. Oh, what's this little settings thing here? So I can get rid of is nullable. But that probably won't work because I already have data in there. I assume that won't work. Let's give it a second. Oh, why did that work? That shouldn't have because it's not nullable. Let's delete those rows and see if we can add new ones now. Insert row. Put a note in there. Let's see if that'll save. All right, I don't understand why that worked because I thought we just set that to not nullable. Maybe it didn't save properly. Oh, it didn't. So I untick that, save it. Updating column user ID, so that's what I would expect. All right, so maybe it just fails silently there, which is kind of annoying. I'm going to try one more thing. Hang on, this is kind of bugging me now. We'll delete all the rows. We'll then come in here, edit the table, and then change that to not allow it to be nullable. Because you wouldn't have a note without a user ID. It doesn't make sense, at least in the context of this application. So I'll give that a second. Now if I try and insert a row and give it a note, this should not work. Okay, there we go. Yep. So now what I can do here is basically say, hey, this is going to be for... Yeah, right. It's spazzing out a little bit here. Let's give it another crack. Insert row, view data. Okay, it wants me to paste it in there first. All right, so anyway, that's set up correctly now. We have a user ID. It has to be filled in for the notes. So I'm going to open this in a new tab, authentication, because I then want to find the user ID of a user. There it is there. We can actually copy it. There's a beautiful little copy button there. And now let's insert some new data. We will paste in the user ID and then give it a note. So my note. Let's save it. Give it a second. And there we go. So the user with that ID can view this note. And I don't think I've actually showed you the policy yet. I did this before, but the stream failed. And to do that, can I delete this policy? Let's give that a second. And I'll add it back in again, because there's something I need to explain to you that confused me here. So if we go to create a policy from a template, see how it says enable delete access for users based on their user ID? That's kind of misleading because in the next page, right, if we say use template, it just means that it's going to set delete by default. It's basically saying a policy based on the user ID. So if I go back to view templates, this basically means you can add policies based on their ID. This means you can add policies based on their email. Now, you'd never do it by email. Maybe there's some edge case why you would, but usually you do it by an ID because you don't want to couple it to the email in case people can sign up without an email. So let's come in here, do it based on their ID, and we're going to choose OR because a user should be able to view a note, insert, update, and delete. So I think of select as just view here. It basically means we can do a select on that note. All right, and the auth ID, so the user's ID needs to match up with the user ID on this column. So let's review that. You can have a look at that if you want. I can go ahead and save this policy and it should work. Give it a second. All right, so check this out. If we go to our database again, we'll add another note that does not belong to this user. Oh, I can't because I've only got one user. That's all right. We'll refresh the page here and I'll just show you that it is working. And there we go. The note comes through. And then let's have a look at this note and see it says my note. But if we come out here, log out, and then register with a different user, somebody else at example.com, change that to example. There we go. So we register that account. Let's go to authentication, users, and then this is the other person. We will copy that, and then we'll create a new note in here, and we'll call it some other note. So now we paste in that person's ID and save it. They should only see some other note if this has all worked correctly. Refresh the page, gets console logged. We've only got one note, and it says some other note. So there we go. The notes are now being scoped by user, which is exactly what we want. Everything is working really nicely. So let's log in as my other account. Look at quasarcast.com. Hopefully I remember the password. There we go. All right, so the next thing I want to do, I think I'm ready now to start basically building out the code around all of this. So obviously this is an example. I don't want to be doing that every time. We want to create a really clean way to be let me throw on that side. To be able to access this data using that API that I did in the previous video, in the previous stream I was doing before. Hello, Pitwoo. Thanks for the thumbs up. All right, so I guess I'll start by just creating a composables directory in here. Composables, and this is going to be for dealing with composables. And another thing I want to do is basically have a way to deal with state, and I use Vuex ORM for that. Even though Pina is the new kind of like way of doing things, I still use Vuex ORM. It basically abstracts all of Vuex out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. That'll make more sense to you, I think, as I get started here. So Vuex ORM, am I using Vuex in this project? Crap, maybe I'm not. Oh, so I might actually even shut this project down and then start it up again, do it again with Vuex, unless there's an easy way to add it in. I don't know if there is. That's right. That'll give me an opportunity to show you again how easy it is to set this up, set up an authenticated application. So let's rmrf quasar. What did I call it? I called it like to do or something. To do. Oh, bugger, I've forgotten now. What do we call it? Quasar notes demo. All right. Quasar dash notes dash demo, and we'll create that project again. Quasar create Quasar dash notes dash demo. Make sure I answer the questions correctly this time. All right, so Quasar notes demo, that's fine. Quasar notes demo. Quasar notes demo. I can probably just leave that the same. Look at quasarcast.com. SAS is fine. Now we want to use Vuex. That was the important thing I missed. And we might throw Axios in there. No, we won't need it because we're using Supabase. Yes, we'll leave that out. It's easy to add in anyway. I don't like Prettier. I hate it, so I'm going to use standard. And yes, we'll use Yarn to install that when it's done. Quasar-notes-demo and open that in code. I'm just quickly writing out the code. The next command so that when this is done, it runs those commands. And then that'll open it up. The next thing I'll do is I'll add the app extension, and then I'm going to need my credentials. So let's come in here. We'll go into settings, and I believe it is under API, and they're the two credentials that I'm going to need. Give that another second to run. What else can I close out here? I need that open. I can close that, and I can close that out, and there's my credentials. Nearly done. There we go. So I'll open up my console here, and now we can say Quasar extension add, and it's at viewauth/auth to add that extension. Oh, I want that. I'm actually going to save that. Nice. We didn't lose the scratch pad, which is cool. So this is going to add that app extension, and as I showed you before, I'm then going to choose Supabase. Oh, another thumbs up. How do I say that? Is that George? Annabelle Zapata? I'm sorry, just butchered your name, but thanks for the thumbs up. So we're going to use Supabase for authentication. So I selected that from the list. Notice we get this config directory, so I can start filling this stuff in now. There is the API key, so let's go ahead and copy that, paste it in here as a Supabase key. And the other thing I have here is the URL. Let's go ahead and paste that in here. Cool. All right, so now that that's done, I should easily be able to say just Quasar dev, and it will just work. I'll have an app with all the authentication scaffolding that I need. This still gets me excited. I love this project. All right, so that'll be done in a second. And then we're going to install Vuex ORM. Did I choose Vuex or did it not show up in the list? Source. Oh no, it did show up in the list and I did select it. All right, so now I should be able to go to login, and I already had that account. So let's say luke@quasarcast.com, my password, and log in. There we go. So everything is working, and we're kind of like back to where we were before. All right, so the next thing we want to do is start actually fleshing out this API here. So I'm going to jump into, and by the way, for those of you that are watching, once you've set up the authentication, you can jump into this auth directory, go to components, and basically change this to your heart's content. So if you don't like the way the login screen looks, you can just come in here. All of the code is there ready for you to edit. You can freely edit that safely, so that's really cool. Okay, so next thing we want to do is start building the abstractions. And if we go to that kind of scratch pad that we had before, the first thing we'll do here is use API and build out these methods. In fact, I'm going to copy that and I'll create a... Oh, actually, no. First, I want to go to my ES linter. I like to have stronger linting by default. And I like to use Vue 3 recommended. So let's save that, restart the server, and fix all the complaints that it comes up with. Because by default, Quasar isn't quite compliant with the Vue 3 recommended linting. So you'll see that when that loads, it's actually going to start complaining a little bit about a few things, which will point us in the right direction. And I know that one of them is, here we go, error 404, because it considers this to be one word. I think that's the problem that it is. Oh no, I just need to press save on that. Cool, so that's solved. Oh, they might have fixed the linting problems. Very nice. That team moves fast. So, okay, so next thing I'll do, I think, is set up Vuex ORM, which is going to allow me to very easily work with models. And so let's do that by starting off with a models directory here, models, and we'll create a new file in there called note.js. All right, so this is our note. And let's go to defining models. I'm just going to steal all of this code here. We're going to have to install Vuex ORM. So let's go to installation, yarn add, and we actually only need this here. Here we go, yarn add Vuex ORM core. And the other thing we'll actually need to do is go into the setup. Where is it? Here it is here. And this is where we register everything into the database. So what we can do now is we jump into store, we jump into index.js, and we want to actually use Vuex ORM here. Vuex is already, so that's already done for us behind the scenes. We want to create our database, which means that we'll need to import Vuex ORM. So let's do that here. Oops, copy that properly. So kind of just want to steal that code there. I don't think I really need these comments. I'll leave them there just in case. All right, so that's our database, and then we're going to register our model to that database, which is going to be note. So let's come back to our note.js here and change that to note and change users here to notes. That's what it'll look like inside of the store. And a note has got, I believe we just called that the note. What do we call that in Supabase? Database. Give it a second to load. Oh, hang on. This is the table editor. Give that a little second. And we called it note singular. So note, and that's just going to be a string. I believe that is everything. Oh, and user ID. We should probably add that just in case you can share notes in the future and do stuff like that. So might as well pull that in as well. User ID. This.adder, and I'll set that to null by default. Okay, so we got note. Why is that got a squiggly? Note is declared but never used. Okay, so we want to say export default class note. Now we can come down here. We should be able to import that. There we go. We can. And now we actually want to use Vuex ORM. So let's come down here. I love Vuex ORM. I think it's one of the greatest tools ever created for the front end. Created by a guy in the Vue core team called Kia King. He's also happens to be just one of the nicest guys that you ever meet. I never met him in person, but like talking to him on Slack, he's just really kind, like a real optimist and just lovely person. All right, so it looks like that's all good to go. And I can test that by opening up my console here. And if I go to View, we should have Vuex. There it is. And it should be set up. Notice that Notes is now sitting there ready in the store. And I'm not going to go into how Vuex works or any of that. I don't really have, it's kind of like falls out of the scope of this video. Cool. But that's ready for us to start working with. But I want to make it a composable that makes it really easy to work with, like I described in this API here. So the next thing we want to do is we'll jump into source and we'll create a new folder here called composables. And I'd probably name this a little bit better in the future, but this is going to be a simple app for now. Let me just come back here. What did we call it? We put it in the scratch pad and we gave it a name. So this is going to be use API. So composables, new file, use API.js. Okay, so this is basically our very first abstraction over. I'm gonna cut that out for now. It's gonna be too much work and we don't really need it. The functionality in this video. So this is our first abstraction over Supabase. So the first thing we'll do here is we'll say, I think it was use client. There we go. So we'll pluck that out of Supabase. Why is it doing this require thing? We want to say import use client from there. And now this is going to say export default. It's going to be a composable function like so. And then we can say here const Supabase is equal to use client. Make sure I spell const correctly. And there we go. We're ready to start using Supabase inside of this file. And that's Quasar auth, which is basically giving us this composable to easily use the client out of Supabase. I probably should have called this use Supabase. There might be a better name that I can give that, but it doesn't. It's kind of obvious that it's Supabase because it comes out of Supabase anyway. All right, so the next thing we want to do is start implementing this functionality. And the first thing that we want is a function for create. Function create, that's going to take in a form or data, whatever you want to call it. Some people hate calling it form, like the guy I work with, but that's all right. He prefers to call it something like data because he thinks forms should just be for forms, whereas it's possible this would not be in a form. Anyway, beside the point, now I need to figure out how to use Supabase to create data. Now, one thing I forgot here is use API. Do we give it the class at this point? I don't think we do. I think we just give it the entity name. Entity like this. Yeah, so that might be equal to, for example, notes, like plural, which is how it can then be found inside of Supabase. All right, so now we can say Supabase dot, and this is where we start working with Supabase. Is RPC what we want? No, that's a function call. So how do you then start? We used like select before, didn't we? But that's not even showing up. All right, back to the docs. Supabase, JavaScript, docs. I did this before, but now I've lost all that code. Is that what it was? Yeah, you can find it in here. And what have we got? We got this is for dealing with the database, and now we want to look at fetching data. Okay, so this goes supabase.from. Let's do that. Supabase. All right, so that is typing, which means that it is actually available there. Cool. So Supabase from, and then this is where instead of saying cities, we basically take that entity that was passed through, which in our case is going to be notes, which makes this dynamic. And then this is for creating. So we don't want to do a select, we want to do a create. So create data, inserting. And then we just say insert, and you just give it an array like that. Wow. Jesus, that's so easy. Can you give it an object straight up, or it has to be an array? Yeah, it has to be an array. So then we can just say here, insert, that's going to be an array, and then we pass through the form directly there. In fact, we can now turn this into one line. And now this will be an asynchronous function. We will await that, and we'll say const, and we'll pull out of that the error and the data. Let's say data first, then error is equal to... Did I do this twice? Oh, I literally just wrote that code. Whoops. And then we can basically say, now, do we deal with errors at this level or not? I think we do. So what I'm going to do here is say const error is equal to a ref. So we're going to pull that out of view. We'll say import ref from view. And this is where we're going to store that error that we got from Supabase. So then we can say here, if we have an error, then error.value, we can't call that error. So we'll have to say just err. Oh no, because it has to be called error because it's being pulled out. We'll say error as err. I believe you can do it that way. Now, if we have an error, then error.value is equal to that error. Cool. Otherwise, I think we'll just return the data. Do we? No, we're using the composition API, so we want to do this in a comp API kind of way. So let's say const data is equal to a ref. It's nothing by default. And then we'll simply say here, I guess you could just say if data. Do we assume that we have data if there's no error? I think we do. Or is it possible that you don't actually get data back when you create something for some strange reason? I don't know. By the way, is that the data I get back? We'll have to do a little bit of experimenting here. So let's say if data, we'll call this response data. If response data, then data.value is equal to that response data that we just got. All right, and then we return this. And I'm going to start sort of playing around with this in the UI now so that we can create something a bit more concrete. All right, so basically what we've done here is we've exposed a very nice API that allows us to say use API and then pass through notes, which would be a string. And then we'll be able to say const API is equal to that. And then just, I guess you call this notes API. We should change all these examples here. So then you can say notes API dot create. That's what we've just done there, and you can pass through a form. So let's go ahead and test if this has worked. It's my first attempt, so I highly doubt it. Things never work out the very first time, but you never know. So let's just do Q input. So the quickest way to do this is say const form is equal to a ref that is null. It won't be nothing. It's going to be notes there. We're also going to need the user ID here as well, aren't we? Yeah, okay. So I'll think about that in a second. We'll say here v-model is equal to form.notes. So we're modeling that here using a Quasar input. And let's give it a label called notes. There we go. Throw that over there. Ref is not defined. Where am I getting that? User dashboard because I haven't imported it. So let's import ref from view. Save it. And there we go. Now we can type our notes in. We're also going to need a create button. So let's give that a label equal to create. And that'll do. And then let's say @click is equal to create. And now we need that create function, and we can easily do that by saying create. Hang on, we want that API. So we'll say import what did I call it? I can't remember now. Use API. export default. We need to give it a name as well. Function use API. Let's do it that way. And now I should be able to say here, use API, and that's going to import that, which means I can say const, and we can pull out create. Oh, let's just do that in one line. From use API. And of course, we need to then tell it that we're using notes. By the way, this is not the final abstraction. I'm going to keep abstracting this until the API is really, really beautiful. So now I should be able to say, we've got that create function is now going to be exposed. We can even, hang on, let's do this. I want a loader as well. So let's come in here and say const loading is equal to a ref that is false by default. And then I can say here, when you create it, loading.value is equal to true. And then when it's done, whether it's an error or not, loading.value is then equal to false. And that's it. We've implemented loading as well. So now we can come back here and we can pull out loading from there. And then we can basically say, hey, let me know if this is loading. Save it. And I believe this will work. Blah, blah, blah. Let's create it. And something's gone wrong, which is totally fine. I doubted that everything would just work. Now, the other thing is we can now expose this error and we can expose the data. So let's come down here and we'll say here error and data. Is data an object by default? What do we get? I don't know what we're going to get back, so I don't know whether to make it an object or not. So we'll just leave it as nothing for now. So they're exposed here, and I can basically come down here and just spit out the error. Let's give that a second. Blah, blah, blah. Create. All right, here we go. All right, that's not particularly useful. Error seems to be a function. Oh, somehow that happened. Error event. Error.value is equal to error. That's what I actually want. Let's refresh the page. Try that again. And there we go. Column is trusted of relation. Notes does not exist. Okay. I might have to do some more digging. I believe we created some row level security to basically say I can insert data there. Oh, I need to give it a user ID as well. I bet you that's part of the problem. So the question is then, but I'd probably want to send the user ID on every request. So how do I make a clean API for that? What if we make it an optional parameter here? Yeah, let's do that. Let's say user ID is equal to null by default, and then basically say, hey, if I have a user ID, I want to send it through with the form. So then we can say here, if we have a user ID, before we do anything, I want you to say form dot user underscore ID is equal to that user ID. So this is then going to be a really easy way to do that. You know what, though? In the future, when we do more abstractions, I think I'll tag it. I'll tag models to basically say that they need to send through a user ID. Because I don't want to have to send this through every time. That would be really gross API. But that's okay. We can keep that in the back of our head. So the next thing we want to do is say, instead of just notes, we're saying notes and we need our user ID, which I can probably get from Supabase using use client. So we'll say const Supabase is equal to use client. There we go. And now I can come in here and say const user ID is equal to... Oh, is it going to be available at that point? Probably. I think so, because the loading screen will stop it from loading the page until that's done. So let's say supabase.auth dot, I believe it's session. Hang on. View auth gives me access to this. I just need to rake. Let me just give me a second to rake my brain. It does. We get something called use auth state. That's what it's called. So const auth state is equal to use auth state. And I don't want to pull that out of Supabase. I should be able to pull that out of view auth / core. Use auth state. And let's just basically display that down here to check if it works. So we don't need use client. Save it. There we go. And now that should give me the user's ID. So auth state gives me user nested in it. And inside of that, we have the ID. Sweet. That's exactly what I need. So now, instead of pulling out auth state, I can basically pull out specifically user. And then here, I can send through user.id. And to check if that works, I'm going to do a console.log of user.id. Save it. Let's refresh the page. I'm getting undefined, and I believe that's because it's too early on. We got a dot value here, of course. Let's say user.id.value. Fresh. No, I don't think it's available yet. So what I should do then is we'll pull that out of the auth state. We're also going to pull, instead of setting the user ID at this point, we want to make it so that use API has user ID exposed. So we'll come down here and we'll say const user ID is equal to, we'll have to change that to something else. Default user ID. That actually makes more sense anyway. This is going to be a reference like so, okay, default user ID. Cool, it's fixed up the dot values all over the place. Form.userid is now equal to userid.value. That needs to be fixed up. And now we expose this. And that means I can now come in here and say, pull user ID out of there. Okay, because we can't set it by default because we don't have it yet. However, now we can say handle create clicked. So when they actually go to perform the create, we then say that the user ID is equal to user.value.id. Oh crap, I was trying to access that wrong before, so maybe I do actually have it. How about this? Let's say console.log user.value.id. Oh, I'm going to get some errors now, aren't I? Yeah, but never used. Okay, so I do have it at that point, so I don't have to do any of this crazy business. However, I think this pattern is a good pattern to use anyway, so I'm actually going to keep it. Now at this point, that means that I can say user.value.id, pass it through like that. Keeps our code really clean, even though we're going to clean it up more in the future. I don't need a separate function for creating it now. And let's see what happens. I think that might be everything. Auth state was actually we don't need that anymore. All right, still doesn't like it. Let's go ahead and check if we're actually sending through the ID, user ID there at that point. So we'll say user API. Let's come down here and do a console.log on the form. Save it. Oh, pointer event. All right, I've done something horribly wrong there, haven't I? Okay. When we do a create, we're not actually sending through the form. So let's do this. We'll say create, and I want you to send through the form.value. Oh, I can just say form because I think it's all automatically going to be unwrapped. All right, so still not working. If we jump into use API, I want to do a console.log here to see what we actually have for the form at this point. See if we get the user ID in there. All right. So we are sending through notes and we're sending through that user ID. So in my mind, that means that it should be working. So what's going wrong? Column notes of relation notes does not exist. Perhaps the way I'm sending the data is incorrect. Let's take this, paste it in there. And we'll say Supabase. Seems like a Googleable message. All right, that doesn't look helpful. So it's with the insert, we say from, and then what it is, from entity. So let's also console.log that entity. Oh, like that. And refresh this. Notes. So that should be correct because I believe it is called notes. Yeah, we did call it notes in our database. Maybe you should have a drink or get some air. I probably should. I've been sitting down for a little too long. Now I just really want to get this problem solved though. So we say from and then insert. I'm pretty sure that's what they do in the docs here. And then you give it an array with an object in it. So that's what this should be. This should be an array with the form in it. Let's just do a quick double check there. I expect that to be an array with a form object in it. Array inside of it is an... Do I need to call dot value at some point here? Create. So inside a form here, that should be unwrapped though. Nah, that's going to throw an error, I reckon. Yeah. I don't think it's dot 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 form. The reason being it's actually an array with objects inside of it. Form being one of those objects. So if I come here to the docs, I mean, I could be wrong, but it looks to me like, so form is an object. And it says insert, given an array of objects with the things that you want to insert. So I believe that syntax is correct. You know what? I'll try it anyway. It couldn't hurt. Nope. Let's take a look at this error. Oh, that's some other unrelated problem. Oh, that's right. I feel like we're getting close anyway. Oh, I said from, not form. No, it is from. Right? Yeah. FROM, yeah. Entity, we know that's working. I'm pretty confident that's sending it through correctly. So let's take a closer look at the error that Supabase gives us back. Column notes of relation notes. Oh, it's telling me that that column that I'm trying to insert does not exist. So let's come back here. Oh, I called it note, singular. Oh my God, rookie mistake. Okay, so let's go back to this form. And it's note singular. Oh my gosh, Luke, you fool. Why didn't that? Do I have to refresh the page? What's going on here? Column notes of relation. That's what's being sent through, right? Yeah, I think I will. Oh, hang on. Note. I need to change it there as well because it was adding notes into it, into my core. Hey, I think it worked. Let's come over here. We'll do a refresh. Geez, that's taking a while. And we've got the data in there. How cool is that? All right. I'm going to take the advice of, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce your name, Hidia Aslan. That is a cool last name. And I'm going to take a quick break. Probably be back in about 20 minutes because there is so much more cool shit I want to do. Now that we've got like this foundation here and I know how to communicate to the back end with Supabase, we're going to turn this into something awesome. So I'll